saying thank you and thank you, Dr. Oftelie, and all of our accountability partners for taking your time out to support these meetings with the community. I think they're very important. The community is the word is getting out there now, so more and more engagement, and I think that that's healthy and strong for us. I was saying earlier we have had some really tough conversations, but I think they've been worth it. I really do. Um, Tonight we will be hearing from Dr. Oftelia about the stop and detention assessment, and he'll give you a little bit more about the plan going forward. Um, I all I ask, as always, is that we have respectful dialogue. We respect one another's thoughts and opinions. Everybody is important, and I want to hear what everybody has to say. And don't think that we're just taking these meetings in. We're taking notes and we are doing follow up. So it may not seem like it right off the top. Just bear with us, but we are definitely looking into some of the concerns because that's what we're here for. Is to reach out to the community and to really hear in your voices and make sure that they are acknowledged. So, with that, like I said, just respectful dialogue. Make sure to respect other people's space as well. If you've talked quite a bit, then give someone who hasn't had a chance. One of the things I really am urging and looking forward to. Oh, great! Thank you, Joe. One of the things I'm really urging and looking forward to is that each one of these calls we have more and more different people. It's not always the same people. Usually in meetings like this you get the same few that regularly come to these meetings. So I'm super excited to see new faces, and I want you to know you're welcome to lend your opinion and your thoughts and questions and concerns, and that's what we're here for. So I think I welcomed everybody. Hi, Matt. Good to see you. Um, Reverend Walden is going to give us just a little Black History presentation.
Hello. Hi. Can you
Very
hear
good.
me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, because I've had some. Well, anyway, I'm here. Good. And this is Black History Month. And I grew up in a system. I grew up in a place where Black History was every day. So we didn't have to wait till February. But Seattle has a lot of Black history. One that I think that a lot of people don't know is that the first Black person ever elected to the city council was Sam Smith, and he got elected.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Mother Walden, I think you might be on.
I'll mute myself. Okay.
There you are.
Oh, okay.
Whew.
Okay. Can you hear
Sorry.
me now?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, this is what we've gone through for our for the 400 years that we've been in America. This is what we've gone through. Okay, but yet and still we still rise. And remember that this is Black History Month, and they just came to show out. But you know what? We got a lot more resilience than that. They just babies at this. We've been at this for 400 years. So they just babies. Okay, so we won't let that take our day away because we know who make the sun rise and it's not them. Okay, we'll take our spirituality and move forward because that's what we've always done. So we get back to Black history. We'll just go back to George Washington Bush. He came here in the 1800s before Washington State was a state. It was a territory. George Washington Bush, a Black man, is one of the reasons why we have Washington State. We have the central area because Mr. William Gross came to Seattle, Washington, from Oregon during the territorial times because Oregon didn't allow Negroes to buy property there. He came to Washington State, and no man Yesler, I was a lawyer and a businessman. He had lost his watch, and William Gross sent it back to him, and so he sold him 12 acres It was beginning of the central area. See, you know what makes us strong? What makes us strong is history. History ought to be our Bible, because as long as we got history, we got understanding, because the people who tried to disrupt us don't know that we're the children of the sun, and that we have been around a long time and we will continue to be around. So anyway, we won't let that interfere. I mean, it's a great night. I mean, it's a great night in February. It's a great night to be alive. And it's a great night for us to continue with the work for justice, because we've been working for justice for a long time. For a long time. The great civil rights leader and wound up being the Supreme Court, Thurgood Marshall, fought for us. He brought down the Jim Crow signs. He brought down segregation with his rulings in the Supreme Court. From almost 100 years, we lived in segregation, the black codes, and segregated schools, and a whole bunch on all of that. But we stand today on the shoulders of our ancestors and the people who were never scared. We need to tell these people we were never scared. We didn't have to have sheets cover our face. We stood up, and we will continue to stand up. So this is a good example of why we need Black history. This was an excellent example of why we need Black history. It's an excellent example. And I want to thank Nia, and I want to thank Felicia. We aren't going to get flustered on this. Why would we do that? Because we don't just take our marbles and go home. We stand with the vicissitudes of time. We stand. And you know, I wonder who raised these children, because if racism is still going on in America, somebody's raising them. And hey, it's all right. So I'm done about Black history. I turn it back over to you. So hey, you know, put your happy face on, because you know what? They don't rain on our parade, okay? They don't come from where we came from, okay? And they think they got something going. They ain't got nothing going, okay? They ain't got nothing going.
Well, I have to agree with you. If we let every incident stop us, we wouldn't get anywhere, would we?
We still going the back of the bus, baby.
Okay.
And Thurgood Marshall, he had a lot of losses, but he had a lot of wins, and he kept setting up those cases to be able to take them to the Supreme Court. And we need to understand what Thurgood Marshall did for us. He's not like Justice Thomas. He did a lot for us. He opened these doors. I mean, he brought down the Jim Crow signs, and also brought down the signs that, you know, he opened the door for public accommodation. This is the things that we need to know. Black history will make our people strong. It would give our kids resilience, so they won't be bullied, because nobody can bully you when you know your history. Nobody can bully you when you know who you are. And that's what we have to get. We have to get fortified and certified and bold to understand our history.
Well, we're doing the work. We're doing the work right here now, stopping detentions. So we're gonna
okay, and so thank you for
we're
the
ready to get started.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you so much, though. I appreciate you taking up the gap in that. I was just like trying my best. Nick, did you have a question real quick? Can you wait, hold on. Can you unmute yourself?
Just a quick comment.
Yes.
Those gentlemen, whatever they are, in no way persuaded us or intimidated us. And whoever does the press coverage of this, if it's covered, should say, you know, come talk to people. You don't just yell and scream and say nothing. So that's all. I didn't get it.
Some people, well, we're still 62 strong, so we're still good. Okay. So without further delay, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Oftelie. And if you don't mind, I know this is kind of off script, but if you don't mind, if you just want to do a little bit of the background and then bring us on up to par and go ahead with the assessment, and we'll hear from the others later. You ready? Can you? Let's see.
Okay, it looks like I can unmute myself there. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Reverend Walden, for your wise words. And Nick, thank you as well for your observation. We still, of course, have people on this line who want to tear down the world and bring negativity into it, and of course, racism and their ignorance. I feel actually very sorry for those people, that they're not part of the solution, that they are just trying to tear down. If we could get everyone in this world to be working on things to make things better, just think of what we could accomplish. It's very easy to you people out there who are trying to tear down. It's easy to tear things down. It's easy to throw bombs. It's easy to call names. It's hard to learn and to do the work to bring justice to the world. So I hope and I pray for you that you can find the resolve and the energy to try and learn and to become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. With that, to those of you who don't know me, I'm Antonio Oftelie. I'm the monitor for the Seattle Police Department. My role is to advise the Western District of Washington, the court, on compliance with the consent decree. So I work with the community and all of the other partners in Seattle to work on that, to do some measures of Seattle Police Department to help with innovation and over time to bring a lawful and constitutional organization forward. I just wanted to start this session with kind of 3 level sets. For those of you who were on the last session around crisis intervention, you know that a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight is data, right? It's pretty dry. It's kind of boring. There's a roughly 50-page document of what we call assessments of Seattle Police Department on their stops and detentions. And behind all those numbers, though, I know that it's people, right? It's you, it's your neighbors, it's your families, it's people in the community who experience being stopped by police or have seen it happen. And oftentimes our experiences are based on if that stop was done courteous and there was dignity involved and the reason behind it. And so I do realize that all of those numbers that we'll talk about tonight are people behind the scenes. That being said, the role of the monitor, my job essentially is to look not at individual cases, but systemically. How is the city and the Seattle Police Department working systemically over time to do things better, like stops and detentions, making them lawful and constitutional, and over time, making sure that that they're courteous and done with dignity, and there's full accountability and good outcomes from those. And so the role of the monitor is somewhat limited, right? In that I look at this again systemically, but that doesn't mean that you're limited. Right, the community has no limits on what you can do when it comes to the future of public safety and how you determine what that looks like going forward. So everything we talk about tonight, even though again it's going to be kind of numbers based, it will provide a picture of what's happening right now in Seattle, how things are, and from that we'll hope to chart a course forward as to what we can do next on that. So I believe I can share my screen. Let's see if I can do that. I think. Felicia, you'll have to enable me as a co-host if you can. Or if someone on the CPC staff can do that. Okay, it looks like we got it going now. So let me pull that up. And let me go into someone's trying to request my screen, and I'm going to decline that because I'm sure it's someone who does not have a good intentions. So let me block that there. And I'll go into okay. All right, so you can all see that title slide there. Thumbs up. Yep. Okay, great. Good. Wonderful. Just so you know, we do have someone's able here to get on the slides and do their fun childish stuff. So we'll try and work past that, and we'll see, Felicia, if we can navigate that. But on the seattlemonitor.org website, you will find the assessment.
Can you, excuse me, Dr. Oftelie, can you see who it is? Can you tell who it is that's doing it?
It says Ward iPhone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's decline. There's Alex Carleen trying to control my screen. I'm going to keep declining that. I'm sure that's not their real name, but if they were, all right.
Let's see if I can lock it down.
Yeah. Okay, so they're keep trying to grab my screen here, but I'm going to just try and navigate through this. So what we'll try and do here tonight, if we can, is to we're going to go over the stops, over the assessment. We'll give you a little bit of background on the SPD stops detentions from the context of the pretty much 10 years of the consent decree. We'll look at the findings from this the recent assessment, and then we'll have some discussion on where we go next with that. And we'll have some questions here on what where we'll go next. So what specific ideas do we have to improve stops and detentions in Seattle? All right, someone's still trying to take over my
I'm gonna.
all right. We'll look at what the Community Police Commission can do in 2022 and what the federal monitor can do here. And I will apologize for this Ward iPhone, who is not a good artist by any stretch of the imagination. So let me, you have all right. The person here trying to take over my screen. So let me.
Let's see. I'm trying to get the screen locked down. So.
All right, I'm just have 4 or 5 of them here that are trying to do that. I do see there's some equity, I guess, in the name calling here, so we can. So while we try and avoid reading some of the words on the screen here, I'll give you a little background here. So what do we mean when we're talking about stops and detentions? And Felicia, at any point in time, if you need me to pause based on our individuals trying to infiltrate here, let me know.
Well, at least we know the word is out about the meeting now, huh?
Yeah,
We got a captive audience.
So, and I don't know if you can see, but I'm continuously trying to block someone from taking over my screen. So I'll.
Okay. I need to take it down. I'm trying to. Let's see. Oh wait. Oh wait.
We could take it down.
Okay.
I could talk through the presentation.
It
I could post it later if that's.
It should work. It should work now.
Not working on my end.
Okay. Okay, just go ahead until I can figure it out, please.
Yeah, so I can. So let me talk a bit through the. I have it on paper here as well for me. A bit of what we. So when we're talking about stops and detentions, what that effectively means going forward. So if you are a person, and an officer stops you, is generally under two different. There's 2 different scenarios in which this happens. So one is that for an officer to. All right, I have someone coming at me here from on my screen. Okay. One is that so if someone is stopped, what an officer can do there is they have to have reasonable suspicion to stop someone. So so a reasonable suspicion, meaning under the 4th Amendment, that they have a reasonable and articulable suspicion that an individual was or is about to be engaged in criminal activity. And these stops are commonly called Terry stops, based after the Terry v. Ohio Supreme Court case in 1959. There are also another type of stop which is distinguishable from Terry stops, and that is stops that are probable cause stops, where someone, where an officer may see something happening and has articulable suspicion that improper probable cause, I should say, to initiate a stop. And so those oftentimes, those are generally separate from Terry stops, and the report and the assessment that you have, that we've outlined for you, is based on Terry stops. Sorry, I'm trying to read paper here while I'm talking to you all. I have a lot of graphs, and so I'm not quite sure how to read through these graphs for you. But so over the past few years, just broadly for Terry stops in Seattle, so I'll give you the past 3 years just for context. So the roughly about 8,200 or so Terry stops happened in 2019, about 6,000 or so in 2020. And about 4,200 in 2021. It's unclear as to why those numbers are declining. There are a lot of different reasons for that, but the number has declined year over year over the past 3 years or so for the number of Terry stops. One also important distinction with this and understanding what happens before a Terry stop is about 72% of them are in response to a 911 call for service. So it's community calling 911 to say, hey, there's something happening here. There's someone outside looking suspicious. They're doing some kind of activity. Can you send a cop to check it out? So the vast majority, about 72% of Terry stops, are initiated by a member of the public calling 911. And the balance, about 28%, are from officers proactively doing work. So they're out on patrol, or they're out and working in the community, and they see something happening, and so they initiate a stop that way. So that's a very important distinction to make between how those start, because it helps us to better understand over time as a community what drives stops, and if there is any bad outcomes from them or disparities that we understand kind of where these calls originate from. I had in the slides you can see on the Seattle dashboard for SPD, they do have a Terry stop dashboard. So you as a member of the community can go on. You can look via precinct, neighborhood. You can look to see the composition of officers that are doing the Terry stops, a number of different measures there, the demographics, how many stops, what the result of the stop was, if a gun was recovered, for example, and you can see that. One of the really good things that's come from the consent decree process over the past 10 years has been when this work started, Seattle and the Seattle Police Department did not have the documentation, the data, the analysis on things like Terry stops. So over the period of a decade, okay, someone's sharing. Felicia, I'm saying the actual. Okay. All sorts of fun stuff happening today, right? What an experience! We're all in the mix, right?
That was, I'm sorry, I couldn't find the mute button, but that was me. I was trying to catch up to where you are.
Okay, I don't think you have the PowerPoint I had though.
Okay,
so I can.
Sorry, that's okay. Go ahead.
I could email it to you if you want, but I don't know if it'd be any easier from your screen to share with the infiltrators that we have. So let me know if you want. I can email it to you though, if need be. So let me go back a little bit and try and so where this started with DOJ in the beginning. When we started was DOJ looked at did their investigation at the onset of the consent decree, and they found issues with SPD's policies, training and supervision related to stops. They also had concerns about disparate impact, but did not reach a finding of discriminatory policing. At the time, SPD did not collect adequate data to self-assess its performance related to stops and disparate impacts as well. And so the consent decree required new policies, trainings, documentation, procedures, and supervisory requirements regarding stops, the practices, and bias-free policing. And so so what we've built over the past decade via the consent decree is that infrastructure, new services, new ways, new policies, I should say, supervision, et cetera, to put that in place, as well as all the data and the analytics that we talked about. Going back a little bit further in the 2017 monitoring assessment, what they found in stops and detentions, the 2017 monitor assessment report found SPD in compliance with consent decree requirements based on officers consistently following the legal and policy requirements related to stops, searches, and seizures. The monitoring team in 2017 also found that an individual's race does help to predict the likelihood of being stopped and the likelihood of being frisked by an SPD officer. At that time, while the monitoring team recognized that neither the consent decree nor the court-approved policies on stops and bias-free policing demand that SPD immediately stop practices that may determine or linked to disparate impact, the monitors pointed to the need for more action on this, and hence was created the SPD bias-free policing policy to start to remedy those. Let me skip around here because I'm going to skip over some areas here. My apologies as I'm trying to go through paper here instead of the PowerPoint. I'll pivot a bit here to our assessment findings where they land. So we've spent the past few months developing a methodology to measure stops and detentions, to do the analysis around that. What we found from the outcomes assessment findings for this current assessment that you have the document for is, I'll just read these through since I had them on the PowerPoint, but I'll just read these to you. Racial disparities in stops remained fairly consistent between 2015 and 2020. Let me go back here. So, I'll start first with just general compliance assessment findings. So officers continue to routinely articulate reasonable suspicion for their stops at rates consistent with what was previously found during the sustainment phase of the consent decree. So one of the key findings from this current assessment was looking back to say, do officers, when they make a stop, is it lawful? Lawful meaning, do they have reasonable articulate suspicion in order to be able to stop someone? And so this assessment found that in comparison to the previous assessments, the officers continued to routinely do that lawfully. In addition, officers are appropriately articulating the justification for conducting frisks at rates consistent with previous sustainment phase audits. So frisks are separate from stops. An officer can stop someone based on the reasonable suspicion. And in the course of doing so, if they find that there's reasonable suspicion that a person is armed and dangerous, they can frisk someone. In those cases, primarily looking for weapons. And so that articulation of the justification for frisks has also been consistent with previous sustainment phase audits. In addition, SPD does not conduct frisks as a matter of routine, as a matter of course. So it's not an automatic thing that a frisk would happen. It's up to what happens during the scene. Frisks occurred in about 23% of stops from the years 2018 to 2020, and we'll be refreshing that data with 2021 data as well. What was really interesting with this as well is that race was not a factor in determining an individual's likelihood of being the subject of a bad stop. So bad stop meaning a bad stop would be an officer stopping someone and not having reasonable articulate suspicion to stop someone. They just kind of randomly do it, driven by other factors. So for bad stops, race was not a factor in determining if someone was stopped for that. So there's a number of high level that you'll see in the report assessment findings around compliance based on previous work. And I do apologize if I'm kind of fumbling a little bit over where I'm at in this document here, because I'm was fully prepared to deliver PowerPoint to you, but I'm kind of reading through some things instead. Let me pivot a bit to disparate impact, and then maybe Dr. Gale, let me get through this to the end, and then we'll go to some Q&A. It'll just be easier, I think, just to get through this, and we'll just start talking. Around disparate impact. So the DOJ, as I mentioned earlier, when they originally did the assessments of the analysis, the investigation at the inception of the consent decree, did find, as I mentioned before, areas of disparity, and that that needed to be addressed over time, but that were so I'll read a bit through the consent decree measures around this. So it does have in the document, about halfway through the documentation, presents findings on disparate impact for certain races. As the previous monitoring team noted around this, so how we contextualize this is that sorting out whether disparity on the basis of suspect classifications like race is a result of sorting out whether disparity on the basis of suspect classifications like race is a result of intentional discrimination, the result of unknowing or subconscious bias, or the effect of one or many factors either having nothing to do with race or that are tangled up with race is challenging. So the statement from the previous monitor essentially said, when we're looking at something like disparate impact, so there's different outcomes for people based on something like a stop. Generally, we'll look at those oftentimes from a population-based analysis. So we'll take a look at the entire population of a city, in this case, of course, Seattle, and look at how stops are done via race. And you may find some disparities in those measures. We try and really understand and put in context for all of us here that even if there's disparity in some of these measures, that doesn't automatically mean that there's bias associated with that. Disparity is driven by a lot of factors, social factors, economic factors, the way we have disparities that roll up in a community, from the education system, from the health system, from the human services system, from housing, from mental health systems, et cetera, that can all contribute to disparate impact in the community. Oftentimes, it's the officers who are on the front lines, of course, at interacting with people. And so a population-based view and measures around disparity can be quite complex to be able to discern whether or not there's a real problem with something. But that also means that we do have measures, and SPD, through all the measures they put forward, can see trends in disparity. And so what comes from that is a need to be able to work across multiple partners in the city to better understand what's driving that, to have better analysis, better measures going forward to try and get to the root cause of that, and to come up with community-based solutions on that. And so SPD has been doing that work with CPC and OIG as well. Let me skip here a little bit too. So the racial disparities, when we were talking about disparity, have remained fairly consistent between 2015 and 2020, with the greatest disparities for Native American and Black individuals compared to Seattle's population. We just talked about that. And the differences in frisk rates across races have reduced over time. So there's some interesting findings there, from a gap of 11 percentage points in 2015 to 5 percentage points in 2020. So we're seeing some really great progress in the variance of frisk rates based on race becoming smaller. So frisk rates for stopped individuals range from 7% across races, with a low of 20% for white subjects to a high of 27% for Asian and Black subjects between 2018 and 2020. One other interesting finding was from 2018 to 2020, the rate at which SPD officers found weapons in stops with in a stop with a frisk was higher for white subjects than any other racial group, and 10 percentage points higher than frisks of Black individuals. So this difference is similar to earlier findings by the previous monitor. Other broader assessment findings were that SPD has developed a robust in-house analytics that confirm the stop disparities. Few, really, if any, law enforcement agencies have this level of analytics. So one good thing we have here in Seattle is the ability to really look under the hood, to see the numbers. You have the dashboard to be able to look at, to analyze that and better understand what's happening and start to create solutions, community driven, for different policies and practices when it comes to stops. Part of those findings is that we need to even do more, though, to have SPD work on that analytic capacity and continue to collaborate with CPC and the other partners to identify opportunities for improvements and recommendations for more equitable policing going forward. A couple of just recommendations, and then I'll stop for just Q&A here, since this is, I'm sure, very boring to you guys to have me just here reading to you. But CPC should engage with the partners to continue disparity analysis and collaborative action toward addressing unwarranted disparities. The Office of Inspector General should consider conducting a systemic review of SPD stops and frisk practices in the future to monitor performance over time to support sustainment and improvement. And there's certain small tactical things like SPD should study the data questions raised in the monitoring report to improve data quality as possible, particularly with regard to documenting the race of stop subjects and clarifying the field contact outcome. So we need to get deeper analysis on what happens during a stop, what the outcome from those stops is, and what the overall results of that going forward are. So I think I'm going to stop there on the reading part because I'm kind of jumping around here a bit, and as I said, I'm sure that's not very fun for all of you. But Felicia, why don't we go to well, first let me turn to Chief Diaz, if he's still on, if you wanted to relay any context around that, any insights into current work that's happening, anything that I may have said wrong that you'd like to challenge me on, or maybe you'd like to add to. Maybe the chief, I think he may have had to drop. So maybe Brian Maxey, if you want to relay anything or not, up to you. We can just go straight to Q&A.
Yeah, I'll just be brief because I'm also playing whack-a-mole, trying to hold the gates here.
Thank you, Brian.
The chief is on the East Coast, so I know he was planning on being here for some period of time, and he probably just had to go. I know he wanted to be here, and this certainly was a very disappointing start to this meeting. And I got to tell you how resolute Reverend Walden was, and the grace with which Felicia Cross and yourself have handled this, as well as everyone here that has stuck that out. It is inspiring. I'm sorry that happened.
Thank you.
With regards to the stops and detentions report, certainly we're gratified to have the monitor's analysis. I think it mostly corroborated our own internal analysis that we've been doing for many years now. If you recall, at the beginning of the consent decree, we did not record Terry stops in any form or fashion. There were occasionally street check forms done if something was of an investigative value, but actually recording the when, how, why, and what officers were doing was not happening. We have had several iterations of that, and now we are recording consistently the interactions that officers have when they stop and detain someone. Also, as noted in the monitor's report, Seattle Police Department does not have a policy of stop and frisk, which many jurisdictions in this country have used and are mostly ceasing, often under court order. But we do not use that. We go out and patrol, and when we encounter suspect or criminal activity, then we engage and hopefully lawfully, which is what I think the monitor has found in analyzing the justifications for our stops. As far as the data and disparity, we continue to work on this. It is incredibly complex. We do have our data analytics platform, which is one of the most comprehensive data analytics systems in any police department in the country. And we have very talented people that are digging and rooting around in that and coming up with novel and innovative ways of finding out, where we can improve. Because from the department's perspective, we don't just want to make sure that our engagement is neutral. If we're just reflecting upstream disparities in our stops, that's probably not good enough. We need to be taking that extra step to make sure that on an institutional level and a relational level, we are doing the best we can to ensure that we are increasing equity, not just maintaining it. So I just want to say thank you to the monitor, and I'm here to answer any questions that I can. But really, I think this is the community's time, so I will yield.
Great, thank you. Agnes Govern, not sure if you can unmute yourself or if that has to be done by Felicia, so.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Felicia. And again, my appreciation to Reverend Walden, who allowed us all to come to a higher place. I truly appreciate that. My name is Agnes Govern, and together with Kim Pasciuto and Donna Stringer, we are speaking on behalf of a mouthful, which is Proactive Persistent People for Progress. P4 is what we call ourselves, which is a local group that's working to strengthen democracy and advocate for progressive values. And we've spent the last 6 months educating ourselves, looking at the city's police oversight, accountability structure, attending CPC meetings, paying attention to the work of the OPA and the OIG, and the work of the federal monitor, and listening, probably most importantly, listening to the community response that in the 3 community outreach meetings that CPC has sponsored over the last 4 or 5 months. And while we still have a lot to learn, I'd like to summarize what we've heard and then turn to Kim, who's going to ask some very specific questions on tonight's topic of stops and detentions. I want to start by saying how much we appreciate the work that many community members have been doing over many years. And for some, I know it's been decades. Their dedication to make the Seattle Police Department more accountable to the people it serves has resulted in significant reforms at both the local and state level, and we appreciate that. And yet, after 10 years of federal oversight and lots of community involvement to make policing in Seattle more just and accountable, we share the outrage of those communities that have been affected, that the deficiencies and discrimination in policing that brought about the 2012 consent decree remain with us today. Public testimony that we have heard indicates that the use of deadly force has resulted in more killings by police during the 10 years of federal oversight than the previous 10 years. That African Americans are still stopped more often and more likely to have a gun pointed at them. That there is a need for better police contracts to ensure accountability, something that Mothers for Police Accountability has been advocating for over 30 years. That there are clear differences regarding crisis intervention rates between different parts of the city, and no sense that either the monitor or SPD is looking to understand those differences. And there is a wide agreement that the baseline metrics developed in 2012 as part of the consent decree are woefully inadequate for today. We have a police oversight structure in Seattle that is ineffective. It relies heavily on police investigating police and is widely viewed as not effectively resulting in increased accountability and more just police practices. After all, shouldn't that be the metric by which we all judge success? Just in the last 2 weeks, there are 2 clear examples of oversight bodies not doing their job in a way that builds trust with the community. The OPA's recent finding on the killing of Derek Hayden in last February, where 2 officers were found to violate SPD policies on de-escalation, yet deemed in compliance with the use of force policy, despite the fact that the use of deadly force was a direct result of not following de-escalation policies. I think this has resulted in 1 and 3 day suspensions for the 2 officers as determined by Chief Diaz for the loss of a life that would likely not have occurred had de-escalation policies been followed. And what a tragedy also that the initial officers that responded to that call were following those de-escalation policies to a T. And how disappointed those officers must be that two officers not following those policies led to the loss of a life. And then there was a presentation by the Office of the Inspector General on their audit of SPD's disciplinary practices at the city's Public Safety Committee in late January. Presented lots of numbers and data, but no real information. No one listening would have understood the conclusion of the audit, except that Councilmember Peterson summarized the main finding of the audit, that gaps in SPD's disciplinary system create issues with timeliness, fairness, consistency, and transparency. It also seems that independent media outlets like the South Seattle Emerald, Amari Salisbury, and Publicola are doing more work on police accountability than the formal structures that are funded and set up to do this work. And finally, the inadequacy of federal oversight, which sets the very low bar of constitutional policing and offers little assistance in implementing the reforms asked for by the community that would really result in a policing organization trusted by the communities it serves. The federal monitor in the October community meeting noted that the Center for Police Equity has found disturbing trends and found lots of room for improvement. But when asked over and over again in community meetings about such things, deflects to the state legislature or some other body, rather than offering real practicable recommendations to bring about these improvements. Despite wide agreement that the baseline metrics are inadequate, rather than offering steps to address this, the federal monitor deflects by saying he must use them to be consistent. We are left wondering if the consent decree is being used to avoid accountability, rather than helping Seattle bring about a transparent, accountable, trusted, and legitimate policing organization. This meeting was called specifically to get community input on the monitor's stops and detention assessment, almost a 50-page document. And yet the preliminary report was not available until late Sunday. It leaves us with the conclusion that you, Dr. Oftelie, are more interested in checking the box on collaboration with the community rather than a sincere attempt to help the community bring about more just policing. I'm going to turn it over now to Kim, who will ask very specific questions on the assessment.
I'm wondering, Agnes, if it's okay, can I address a few of those before we get to the deeper questions, or?
I think I prefer to go with the questions and then you can respond because we're presenting as a group.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Kim, I think Felicia may need to help you unmute, I believe.
Great, thank you so much. To Ms. Govern's comments, I would like to add that the lack of progress in police reform, the active opposition to reform by the Guild, and within some parts of SPD management, the obfuscation, hot potato, and slow roll raise serious concerns not only among the communities most impacted by these unfair practices and lack of consequences. They cause people like me, white, privileged, gray-haired people, to doubt the police, the Guild, and the myriad of city and county offices, commissions, and councils that are supposed to hold the police accountable. At the conclusion of this report, Doctor, you express confidence in the 3 oversight commissions and urge the SPD to consult with them and the community to create solutions. As a member of the public, I'm sorry to say that I do not share your confidence in the commitments of SPD and the Guild, or even that these bodies will work together in a timely way. OPA and the Office of the Inspector General did not even send a representative to the last CPC meeting. Our institutions are failing us, and they're failing all of us. Delay means more avoidable deaths of real people with families and a future. We want more than the constitutional minimum. We want all of you to do more than measure it. We want you to change it, and we are growing in number. I have 4 questions for you, Doctor. One, and this picks up and follows on Agnes's comment. Can you commit to getting the next report for use of force out at least a week before the public meeting?
Absolutely. Let me first reiterate with the stops and detentions one. It's my goal was with all these assessments to have them available to the public 2 weeks prior to each community engagement session. We did miss that one for this. We did not want to move the date of this session. And so that was out. We had a number of revisions and just a lot of work that delayed that. This conversation tonight, though, is what I would call this, the start of engagement, right? To have some broad overview of what's in that document. The document is on the Monitor website, and then we have questions on the website for people to be able to give ideas or in a number of categories. And so completely understand that I really wanted to have this to you earlier. We missed that mark. We're going to leave it on the website and leave open that the mechanism for you guys for all community to give input on that we'll leave that open for a while here for weeks. And so I'm hoping you guys can do that. With the use of force one, I think Felicia was going to talk about this at the end, but I'll kind of start relaying now. I think what we're going to do with that one is present that at the April meeting. It must be April 10th, 11th, or 12th, somewhere in there, and use the March, the next session, which is March something, 8th, 9th, 10th, to do an overview of just broadly about use of force. We want to be able to include in the use of force assessment all the 2021 data. And so what I was running into with that one is that if we did this presentation in March for use of force, it would be the same thing that happened with this one, where it would be not enough time for you guys to review ahead of time. So what we're hoping to do here with your support and with everyone is to get that use of force assessment ready for you with all the relevant information in the 2021 data as well. Get that out to you at least 2 weeks beforehand, but use the March date to do a broad overview, and then we'll get into the data in the April date. So yes, so I apologize for this particular stops report and how that landed just this weekend, and we'll do everything possible to have the next one earlier.
Thank you. I have a couple of technical questions about the data that was presented and the recommendations that are included. You refer to societal inequities and social factors as impacting disparities that might contraindicate bias, and suggest that the city, including the SPD, should address them. Later in the report, you specifically name crime rates, presumably in given neighborhoods, and income as examples of those societal forces. The two named social factors are themselves a result of historic racism, so how can you separate them from racially biased policing? And aren't you giving SPD and the Guild the ability to finger point and deflect and foot drag?
Yeah, Kim, and thank you for that question. It's, honestly, that is, I think, the hardest question and set of issues to deal with in policing today is this intersection of disparity and bias and what causes it, right? Scholars and practitioners and people, courts around the country argue about this every day, right? As to how to measure that and what to do about it. So we do know in Seattle, there is disparity, right? It's listed in the report. We have a bunch of pages on that, and that's been, the previous monitor found that SPD finds it within their metrics. So then it becomes what causes that, right? Disparity. And then after that is what can we do about it? Some of the driving causes, that's where the challenge lies. And I think you're right in that maybe the two areas we listed in the document are probably too narrow. We have systemic and structural racism in the United States. It's been that way since 1619, right? Is a good mark, right? To start that. In our education system, in housing, in the banking system, in health, in human services, in education, did I mention that one? You go through all the systems we have set up. They have been built under the guise of, with structural racism embedded from the beginning. We've worked for years and years, of course, across this country to try and root that out, but it still is there. All those systems have outcomes that have disparity, that land on the streets of every city in this country, right? Then when people interact with police, right? Police are interacting with that accumulated disparity, and that it reflects in the numbers. And so when we take a look at what the cause is, it's difficult, right? It's all of it, and parsing how you deal with every system in order to get better outcomes in policing is, I think, going to be a generational, if not even the next generation, work for all of us to do that. There are ways, burgeoning methods, you could say, to get better analysis of that. Things like propensity score matching, for example, different statistical techniques to be able to get a bit more to root cause, to be able to separate out various factors in order to say, here are the things that are really driving certain disparities. We have to get better at that as a nation, as well as within Seattle. It's going to take all of us to do that and to put pressure on all these systems to do that work. And so I guess where I'm going with that is it keeps me up at night, that issue, right? It's gut-wrenching. I've experienced what I feel like is biased policing. One of my associate monitors, Ron, on the line here, has experienced it multiple times in Seattle. Distinguishing between bias and the disparity, that's the tough part. And so I've actually, Kim, kind of actually forgotten your question as I've gone on a rant here about that, but it's the most difficult area around this, I guess, is what I would say. And and we're looking for everyone's help here on what to do next with that.
I'll just ask one more question, Doctor, if that's all right. The data seems focused on whether there is bias towards Black and brown people, and not whether bias is demonstrated by the exercise of discretion in favor of white people. If selective enforcement of the law is bias, as you cite in the report, and a disproportionate number of white people are not stopped, or are stopped but not frisked, or are stopped, frisked, and deem a field contact with no further action in spite of a higher number of guns, is this not a demonstration of bias?
So it's a great question. There's part of the challenge for my role here is that I have to be able to present data to the court and have it in a legal setting ultimately, right? When we file this with the court, to be able to legally say we have found bias from all the measures we have here because of the complexity and disparity. I can't say that from a legal perspective in front of a judge that hey, we have found bias in this. That being said, when we look at our gut level reactions to this, right, our lived experience, we feel that bias, right? And I'm gonna go a little bit outside of the scope of maybe what I should say here, right? But say when we look at the fact that when officers find more knives, for example, on white subjects, on white community members, if you walk that backwards a little bit, I think, right, my assumption is, my gut says, that's because generally when an officer sees someone that's white, they're not necessarily going to stop them. The ones they do stop are the ones they really are looking at and saying, okay, this character here really needs to be stopped, because they have just a deeper sense that this is going to be someone that perhaps has a weapon, right? That in and itself, I cannot prove legally that there's bias there, or in this case, selective enforcement or whatnot. But my gut is that's what it is, right? And so while I can put the data and do this analysis and present it to the court in ways that can say, here is disparity, here's how stops are done lawfully and constitutionally or not. It's going to take all of us to be able to take a look at these deeper and more nuanced type of understandings, right, that we see through data and through lived experience, and be able to figure out what do we do as a city to try and reduce, eliminate, mitigate, whatever we can in order to improve those measures, right? To Agnes's, one of her points related to that is I fully understand that, this consent decree and the settlement agreement was written a decade ago, right? And based on expectations that people had at the time, based on the need for the basic functioning of the police department to be lawful and constitutional. That baseline is kind of like called like the foundation for effective policing, constitutional, lawful. I'm limited in what I can do because of that court agreement. You guys are not limited, right? I want you to understand that the data we're giving you and the insights, I pray that you take this and you guys figure out ways to work across the entire city to make this stuff better. You're not limited like I am, right? I can help as much as possible to a point. And then we need community to engage in it. So we can't, for example, go back and change, or well, we could, you could go back if Department of Justice wanted to, and the courts and whatnot, and the city attorney to relook at certain things in the consent decree and reopen that. That's a very lengthy process, as you could say, right? But I think going forward, it's where you and your ideas and 4P and your sets of ideas on what's above and beyond the consent decree is where we really need your help on that.
I just would suggest that when you alluded earlier to the fact that there may be some emerging tools for better analysis to get at the root cause, that you also look at the reasons given for the deference shown to whites in the stop and frisk and detain scenario. I think those tools could equally be applied to the other side of the equation, and I didn't see any evidence of that in the report. Yeah,
there are some, as we've gone through this, there are, ideas that have percolated up for other measures that I think, whether I do that, the monitoring team, or CPC or OIG or the community does that, I think there's some good things that could be done there. For example, should we do deeper analysis on what the outcomes of what happens from stops, right? The documentation around that to better understand what the impact of a stop was. Should we do some work as a community around the dignity, what I would call the dignity of a stop, by looking, for example, at extensive body-worn camera footage to understand, was that officer treating someone with respect according to policy and with dignity? Looking at things like that. Perhaps looking at cross-referencing the race of an officer with the race of a person stopped. Is there differences in the way outcomes happen from that? I mean, there are a bunch of different things that could be looked at that we could all develop a methodology around, or OIG could, or CPC could, in order to better understand in a more nuanced way things that are happening, to both bring new insights as well as to try and better understand current disparities that we're seeing.
Thank you.
I think we probably let's go with Dr. Gail next, and then Donna, and then January. Dr. Gail, thank you for your patience. You there? Oh, I have to unmute you. Sorry.
Okay, there we go.
There you go. Okay.
It's a little late in the game, but I was trying to help Dr. Oftelie and suggest, Felicia, if you could put the link to the report in the chat, and then people could look at it and he could go through the pages, but I think we're beyond that now. So, thank you to Agnes and folks. I think they made a lot of the points I was going to make. But the 48 pages is really reducible. It's about half and half, 2 points. So I'm going to say what they are really quick. The conclusions, which don't come till literally like page 40, 43, is even the most sophisticated SPD disparity analysis shows that being stopped and frisked increases much more based on the racial composition of the neighborhood. In other words, if you don't fit in the neighborhood, which again is a definite indication of bias. Two, the second point that you conclude, officers frisk minorities more frequently than white subjects. And third, most likely to find a weapon on a white subject after a frisk, which you talked about. Okay, so that's one half of the report. The other half of the report is, I'm a data scientist and I am shocked. Literally one half of the words in the report are trying to simply tell people correlation does not equal causation. In other words, disparity is not equal to bias. And, you know, there's only so much you can flog that point, because if you want to go, you know, hog wild with it, well, we could say that about everything, about education, about prison, about redlining, about, you know, the whole list. So we don't do that. We understand, you know, we do have to analyze why things are the way they are, who actually is the last link of the chain in the bias. But to pretend that correlation isn't causation is something to write like 25 pages on is just, I think, ridiculous. But here's the real point. Why you're publishing, you're presenting this to the community in January of 2022, when the SPD commissioned a truly independent study that was released in January of 2021, 13 months ago. They didn't put it on their website until July. And what did that independent study show? It actually showed that there was bias. And I can go through, you know, just briefly. Black people 5.4 times more likely to be stopped than white. Black people 7.14 times more likely to be subject to use of force, with little or no change in that from 2015 to 19 through all sectors of the city. It was especially bad with Black children. And when I say children, they actually identified not 17, 18-year-olds, but 14, 15-year-olds. There was a discrepancy, a racial discrepancy with pointing firearms. Okay, I could go on. The question is, why was 48 pages a year later spent on data that was cultivated by the SPD, you presenting it, repackaging it and presenting it, when there's a much clearer study that was done over a year ago? So that's number one. Number two, I do want to go into why this data is severely flawed in ways people don't appreciate. I want to talk about the Falatogo case, in which Isaiah Falatogo was killed. If I remember right, that was in, I think it was Christmas, it was New Year's Eve, 2018, 12/31/2018. That killing happened because of a pretextual traffic stop. The pretextual traffic stop was first based on officers seeing a car, looking up the license plate and finding that the owner had their license suspended. Here's the problem. The owner was an older Pacific Islander woman, a small, older Pacific Islander woman, Falatogo's mom. Isaiah Falatogo was a young, very large male Pacific Islander. There's no question who was driving the car. That was a pretextual stop that was clearly driven by bias. After that, they decided to follow the car and then stop it because it made an unsafe lane change. That led to his execution. My point is, I don't even know how that gets coded in your data. But all of this fine-grained analysis, all of this understanding, the OPA deemed that the stop was perfectly legal and fair. So my question is, how many of these stops, I mean, we already know there's racial bias. My question is, how much worse is it when we're trusting the SPD data? And the idea, you know, you keep on promoting this idea that there's transparency, the data is available on the website. First of all, the data that's available on the website currently in seattle.gov is not the same data that you have. So like when it comes to the crisis intervention data, use of force is basically missing. It's just a yes/no variable. We can't tell what it is. It doesn't link to any GO reports. It doesn't link to anything that we can actually look at a case. And similarly with this, with the stops and detention, same thing. We can't actually look at what these stops look like. So I think all the points that Agnes and her group made are absolutely right, but I think it's actually much worse than that. And the last thing I want to point out is, it's disingenuous, Dr. Oftelie, to claim that you're listening to the community. Last fall, you slandered the only minority run and owned news source, the South Seattle Emerald. You slandered them and said because they did bang up reporting on the corruption in the OIG and the OPA, you claimed that they were just getting clickbait. You said you were going to read those reports. I don't think you've ever read them because, first of all, you called them clickbait, and why would you read clickbait? So I could go on. I really hope that other people would raise their hand and participate in this. But, all we really have seen tonight is a PR attempt at taking data that was already available 13 months ago and massaging it to seem less horrible.
Dr. Gill, thank you very much for your insight, and same with Agnes and Kim. And we're going to go with Donna, and then January, and then Reverend Walden.
Thank you. I'd like to return to a couple of sentences that my colleague Kim Pisciuto used in her comments. Quote, "We want more than the constitutional minimum. We want you all to do more than measure it. We want you to change it." And Dr. Oftelie, what occurs to me in listening to you over many of these events and reports, did I just lose connection?
You're there.
No, we can hear you.
We hear you.
Okay. What occurs to me is that there is an enormous amount of history and experience behind you and others in this meeting and others doing this kind of work. What is compelling to me is I would appreciate as a member of the community that you use that history and experience to make suggestions for best practices that the community could support and get behind in making changes. I understand you may be limited in how you do your report, but you are not limited in the suggestions you can make to the community in a meeting like this. And that's the degree to which I personally feel you are failing the community. Thank you.
Yeah, Donna, you're right. In that we can make those recommendations. The part of the goal for the preliminary, why we call them preliminary assessments, was to put those out to community so that you could read them and provide ideas. We intentionally do not put in those assessments concrete recommendations. We've had a few broad ones in the stops and detentions report, but we want to hear from community first before we go in and say, here's what should happen next. And so you're right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You do understand that as a member of the community, the ability for me to come up with best practices and make suggestions is enormously limited compared to somebody like you who already has that. So I'm being asked to do something that is much more complex and much less effective than if you joined us as a partner in making recommendations.
So I completely agree. And I think what would be even more powerful for all of us is that if we combine those, right? So if community has recommendations and we combine those into something that can go to the court, that we can put into when we file these assessments with the court, that's where we can all come together on this, right? I also want to make sure that as community creates ideas, or as the monitoring team creates ideas, that those are things that we collectively want to take on, right? There is a pretty big swath, or some measure of people within community that would say, we don't want federal oversight working on that. We want community. We want our current agencies to do that. So minimize the role of the monitor. There are others who say, hey, we want the monitoring team and DOJ and whatnot to do more, right? So we're trying to balance that a bit by better understanding what it is that community would like to see. And so that's why we're holding these sessions, right? Is to hold back a little bit to see where you guys want to go and then we'll come in there with you.
Thank you.
Who's next? I see the hand up for January, and then Nick, I think, has his hand up as well. I think January's hand was up first. Maybe you can try, Felicia, can we unmute her?
Sorry, I thought I was unmuted. Yes, I'm trying. There she. Okay, go back. Unmute. Thank
There
you.
you go. All right. This goes back to the mention of the legality of providing information regarding racial bias. Dr. Gale actually spoke to several instances of experienced and real value of what bias looks like. But there is also much research that has been done suggesting what it looks like for white police officers that psychologically they see other people that look like them as less of a threat. This research is done, so when you speak to the information that you can or cannot submit as research legally to the courts to inform policy, what is it that you need in order to create that information outside of research that's already been done?
That's a good question. The research that's already been done, sociological research on something, like bias, is something that we can factor in to try and create our methodology, to create our measures, right? In order to prove bias, though, there's a higher threshold legally to do that, right? And so one way to do that is, if an incident happens in the community, is to have reports filed with OPA on that, right? To be able to see, here's a number of incidents where there was a report of bias, and factor that in. When we're looking at systemic measures that are in these assessments, for example, those, of course, as we have in the document, we can, the disparity is in there, right? We can see, the lawful nature of stops. We as a community, I think, though, have to say, how do we get more to the root cause of those disparities, to dig in deeper, to make policy and practice changes as much as we can to, to root out, to reduce, mitigate, whatever it may be, disparities and or bias where any is found. We can use research as a background, right, to better understand what's happening and to create measures and metrics. But I can't, for example, file a research report from another, as background necessarily, to prove anything in Seattle, if I'm reading your question right.
Yes. And so with that being the case, what is it outside of our conversations that we as a community can provide to you to ensure that you have what you need in order to move that forward? We can have the conversations. The conversations have been had for quite some time. I've been probably off and on visiting these meetings for about 7 years now. And I'm sure that the ones that have lived in Seattle for a much longer time have been greatly impacted by the society, what's become societal norms. So what is it that this community that's here, the community that you target and you speak to when you're doing PR and you're talking on the news or whatever, what can we provide to you that makes this move forward?
So I think the way I would answer that is that and this is half with my monitor hat on and half with, Antonio person hat on, right? Is that we do know we see disparity. we can have a gut feeling that there's bias in some areas, but it's hard to prove that legally, right? When you have when we're looking at large scale, like population-based trends around disparity. What we need, I think, next, whether it's the monitor or community, is more measures, right? We need the energy for the community to say, we demand more measures, we demand more deeper measures, more transparency around those measures. Maybe we do things with Office of Inspector General and with CPC to review more subsets of body camera footage, for example, to get to understand how these stops are done, to be able to validate stops. There's just a number of different things that if we have the energy and the resolve to dig deeper, as well as outside of what I can do, but is to start looking across partners, across the set of organizations that work in community, so that they're working better together to get to both reducing disparity as well as rooting out any bias. We have to engage with those other partners as well. I'm somewhat limited, but you're not. I can only pretty much look under the hood of the Seattle Police Department, right? Community can say, how do we look across or under the hood of the health system in relation to SPD and human services, or what's happening in certain neighborhoods when it comes to housing that's leading to disparities. All these different interconnected, interdependent drivers of disparity that is just fundamentally we have to do more around that. And that's where we need the energy and resolve for community to come forward and say, let's take that on, because this isn't going to get solved on its own without that.
So energy means hiring more positions in the community and funding the people that do the work.
It could be, that could be, right? And it could also mean going deeper into alternative response, right?
Okay.
If having different forms of services that can interact with people and do what we would currently call stops, right? There isn't always the need for a sworn officer to interface with a member of the public. If that person, if someone calls 911, it doesn't always have to be a sworn officer to go and interact with someone, right? Depending on the context of the situation, right? How can we do new things, new services in order to be able to, create new conditions in the community, right? That could over time reduce disparities, as well as potentially eliminate bias that may or may not happen. Realizing there's bias also could be in other systems, right? But yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, January. I'm just gonna throw this out, and then I'm calling on Reverend Walden. But CPC not having real authority, we can make recommendations. How would you see it? What would it look like if we had a little bit more authority to, to require answers to some of the recommendations that are provided, but some never really seem to come to fruition? And then, Mother, you can go ahead.
Felicia, was that for me? I'm not quite sure if I understood that, but
Yeah, I was just wondering that, with community, and we already have, this Community Police Commission is should be like the hub for the community, and we can have meetings from now till forever. But if we're just like January just kind of mentioned, because I always drag her to the meetings with me, that's what she was trying to say. But if we had a little more authority to have a little more say in what comes out of what the community is giving us to give to the department, then seems like that would be, make it a little bit more legitimate. I might not be articulating myself.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. And that the one is like this, CPC is part of the, how do we get the best ideas coming out of community, right? How those manifest then is by working with the system, whether it's pressure or whatever, to do that. Or, for example, with Seattle City Council, maybe, for example, we take a look at the neighborhoods where disparities tend to be documented in ways that are more troublesome, right? And say, what can we do to create an alternative response, experiment in that particular neighborhood, right? And work with City Council to say, let's fund that, right? I know that we've been, it's been happening for the past year or so, right? A lot of experimentation and funding for pilots and whatnot, but maybe that should be amplified. So concrete ideas that city officials can move forward on, that community can get behind, to get City Council to fund, to get the Herald administration to get behind, I think CPC has already a lot of power to do that, right? And I think that the more we have those ideas documented and backed up by these types of meetings, then the more forceful we can go to City Council and to others and say, let's do this, let's fund this, let's experiment here, let's stand up something new.
Okay, Reverend Walden.
Oh, hi, thank you so much. Can you hear me? I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. It's very seldom in a public space that I can agree with some of what Howard Gale said. And the first part of his presentation was absolutely spot on as it relates to the Oftelie case. Also, that case raised my eyebrows to a high level. I mean, well, it's all of them, but anyway, the facts of that case, and then to found that to be an in policy shooting, I was just like, wow. I mean, it's like, what do you have to have? What happens in Seattle for a shooting not to be in policy? But I just wanted to say that because I mean, Mr. Gale on separate pages, but the articulation around that case and also about bias. I'm sick of people talking about bias. Bias is a new dressed up word for racism. Every decade, people come up with a new word to dress up racism so we get confused. That's all this is. It's about bias. That's all bias is. It's straight up racism that we've been experiencing forever. And you know why? My little angst is a little high right now because we worked hard to bring the DOJ to town. We worked hard to get a monitor because we thought that the monitor would be the hammer to actually help us get some things done. I mean, because without a monitor, we thought that we actually thought having a monitor would be better for the people in Seattle to absolutely be able to be the hammer somewhere. Somewhere you got to have a hammer. The CPC is not the hammer. We can make recommendations that never ever get trained on or accepted, like recommendations in 2015 and 16, like the fastballs and all of this other kind of stuff that was used out there in 2020. It was never trained on. And so we have made recommendations to people who think we have not. We have made recommendation after recommendation. And I'm just a little kind of offended right now because the presentation, I mean, it's like we're skirting the issue. We know that when the police are stopping Black people, it's a bias. And as a lot of times it's just straight up racism. Also, why do we have to continually have to prove something in the courts? The courts has always been against the Negro anyway. I mean, Thurgood Marshall had to go in there and try to get some stuff, but the courts is not our friends. I mean, really and truly, but we was thinking that we could get some justice here. And so far, I mean, yeah, it has been some improvements in Seattle. I'm not going to say we have not. I'm not going to be the person who say we have not. I mean, a lot of this, like the terror stops, was not being recorded. And guns being pointed at people were not being recorded. So it has been a lot of changes. I'm going to say that. And for people who might not understand it, it's been a lot of changes. You see how the police have to do a lot of more documentation than they had to do before. But it's still some problems with stops and detention and terror stop. And we can't skate over that piece because Black people are still getting stopped more than other people. And then if they're stopping white people, there's probably looking like people who might not be middle class. I mean, so if you went by race and class and some of this stuff, you get something else because they're not stopping anybody downtown with a suit and a briefcase, okay? If white or Black, okay? They could stop. If white people are being stopped, then it's an issue of class over there, that they're not in the same class, so they might be being stopped. So this report has a lot of gaps in it. And I agree with Agnes that we needed to get it earlier. Because one of the things that from being here from the beginning. And the DOJ did ask for recommendations from the community. We sent recommendations that we thought should have been part of the consent decree. We did. I mean, some of them made them in there and some of them not, and some of them did not. But all I'm saying is that at this point, there's some gaps, and terror stops, actually Joe Kessler, who was a captain, worked on. He was one of the people who helped chaired stops in detention back in 2013, and recognized the fact that we've had a problem here with this, and to think by now Black people are still being stopped more. And I really agree with what Howard talked about, the report that was already done. See, it was already out there. And so we should have more about, I mean, so I think your report, I'm conflicted because we're here at a community meeting, and if we don't get much and see outcomes from under the consent decree, then all of us who work so hard to bring the DOJ to town, and it was given thousands and thousands of hours here since 2013, look like we failed the community. We don't want to be looking like I mean, because we did this in good faith after John P. Williams was killed and other people was hurt and this and all and Seattle, I mean, I'm glad we came up with some, all the findings on unconstitutional policing and all of that. And some of the issues, some of the areas has had some improvement. But what hasn't happened, what has been improvement that gets people the most upset is the shootings that go up, and also the other, with the terrorist stops and all of that. So anyway, I'm just rambling right now because I'm just at a high level of we want to when you come back the next time, we want to have more of a honest, a real heart-to-heart conversation. I mean, what we want is a heartfelt conversation on where everything has failed, where things has gone right, and what is the best possible that we're going to ever get out of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mother. Did you have something to say, or you? Okay, so we'll go on. Amy.
Hi, thank you. I'd really like to thank Reverend Walden for her remarks. I really appreciated them. I have been kind of distressed about all of this conversation about disparity versus bias. And so I found her remarks, her clear speaking about racism. This is what this is about. It's about racism. So I don't agree that what we need is more measures and more data to be collected. First of all, it's data being collected within SPD as opposed to independent data. When we do have independent reports that are commissioned, that we tend to, as a city, ignore them or push them under the carpet, which is also distressing. Regardless, we see that disparity is happening, whatever we want to call it. And collecting more measures when we know disparity is happening and continues to happen and has not really been improving that much over several years, means that we're not taking an opportunity to look at ways to reduce harm that is happening to our community. And I would like to suggest that perhaps we consider looking for ways to reduce traffic stops further as a way of harm reduction for our community. And if what we're concerned about is traffic safety, then there are other ways that we can effectuate traffic safety. There are other investments we can make, for example, in changing the way various streets are engineered, et cetera, that will improve traffic safety without perpetuating racism in our community. I also would just like to say, whenever I hear in these meetings about community, thousands of protesters went onto the streets in 2020. Why? Because we don't feel like we're being heard. And personally, I mean, I've come to a lot of these meetings and I don't see a lot of changes taking place. I spoke in October at one of these meetings and I was told that I would be followed up with, and I actually followed up. I emailed the CPC to make sure they had a good contact address so that if the court monitor wanted to talk to me or if they wanted to talk to me, they could in October. And now it's February and I haven't heard back, which honestly, I didn't expect to. But when we're talking about involving community and the changes we can make together, I find it really disingenuous when you have community members who are giving up their evenings to be here and then aren't even allowed to effectuate any change or to really be a part of any meaningful conversation. And then we're not talking about harm reduction, we're just talking in circles. So those are just a few of my thoughts. I also am feeling just a little bit riled up because I'm just very disappointed in what I'm hearing here.
Oh, thank you for that, Amy. It's first of all, you can reach me at antonio.oftelie@seattlepolicemonitor.org. Right. So I thus far I've not seen any emails from you. Maybe CPC has, but feel free to email me directly and would be happy to dialogue on any ideas that you might have. Secondly, that's why we're having these meetings. The CPC has really kind of doubled their effort around these community engagement meetings. Felicia's been really putting a lot of energy into this to start doing that more, right? To have more community engagement on this. I feel bad that, if you feel like you're not being listened to, right? I think that's what we're trying to do here, and have some open and honest dialogue. I think with Reverend Walden, I think that's what we're trying to do here, right? At least for me, when I come on here and sometimes I'll say things like, here's my monitor hat and here's my personal hat. That's me saying, hey, I don't have all the answers here, right? We have to together, we have to work together to figure this stuff out, and that requires a lot of listening. And these big assessments, 50-page assessments, all it is data that helps us to understand kind of what's happening. It's not the end all, right? It's the start of trying to figure out where we go next. So those ideas that come from it would be fantastic. I will just, if you engage me, just two things more relative to that. I do understand from people that we want the people that are DOJ and the monitoring team and whatnot to say, here's how we're going to fix everything. Right, here's new things we should be doing. Here's a hammer to let's stop doing X or Y or Z or do something new. There is that happening, right? That does happen. We also need the engagement from community. We posted the crisis intervention assessment, right? It's been a month now, 6 weeks or so, right? You know how many ideas we've got from community on the Monitor website on that? 0. Right? I need you guys too to lean in on this, right? Instead of just saying, hey, no one's listening, to say, hey, here's our ideas. And I also understand that I'm not telling you you guys have to come up with all the ideas, but we want your engagement on it, right? And some the energy, when I mean energy, is saying channeling that energy from people that are on the streets protesting to say, here's concrete ideas that then we can use DOJ and the Federal Monitor as a hammer to get that concrete idea done. Right. And so I'm somewhat limited in the things that I can layer on. I can't add things to the consent decree. But with community can, right? Either via, or via just, CPC and the established accountability partners. So it's just, I just want to reiterate, sorry, I'm kind of rambling here, Amy, but just want to reiterate that this is what we're trying to do, right? Is have this engagement and try and get to what's next around this and how we move things up. I'll stop there. I'm probably not sure if I answered your question, but
I will say that I tried to fill out the crisis intervention thing and it crashed in the middle and erased all my work and I gave up. That's
so
I mean, I just feel like there's so many obstacles. And then even if I spend hours coming up with solutions, my confidence that anyone is going to actually engage with me is very low.
So
Um,
let me just say too, Amy, I don't recall getting an email from you. If you did send one directly to me, if it did go to the CPC inbox, so because I'm very, Dr. Gill will tell you, and anybody else on this call will tell you, I'm very adamant about reaching back out to my community when called upon. I mean, that's something that you know really resonates with me at being a community member. So um, please reach out again. Don't let that trouble you. And you have my word that whatever I can do, I will always reach back out if nothing else. So thank you.
If we should just, I know we have some hands up, just one more quick thing too from mine. On the last call we had and tonight, there have been discussions around certain incidents, right? I honestly am very dismayed by the incidents that were brought up and what happens before a shooting happens, right? A shooting can be justified in the moment, but everything leading up to that moment created the conditions oftentimes for an officer to have to shoot, right? And so, for example, kind of back to Amy's point, and other people brought this up, we should be looking at, especially community driven, around how do we dissect those incidents to walk it backwards, right? To better understand what could have been done to prevent an officer even being in a situation where they had to shoot that was then a justified, right? And have that coded in, right, in policy and practice so that there can be accountability and discipline around that. That's something that's missing in some ways right now that needs to be put in place, right? That's even though I said that I'm looking systemically at things, which is real, we have to, look collectively at some of these incidents and say, how do we make that whole, that whole process work better that leads to bad incidents like that. So, okay. So,
So So we have about 8 minutes. I do want to acknowledge Dr. Gill. I have gone to your website and I have been doing my own little, just search about some of the killings and have looked at the data of like the last 9 or so that you listed off. I also want you to know that I agree with many points you made in your 100 your citizen oversight plan that you put together. And I just want you to know that just like Reverend Walden said tonight, being able to hear you without the venom has been powerful to us, and I appreciate you. I'm gonna let Lisa Judge speak, and then Joanna. We only got about 7 minutes, but I do want to acknowledge you for that because we I take it seriously. We do take it seriously. Okay, Lisa, let me unmute you. There you go.
Thank you, Felicia. I hadn't intended to speak tonight, and I'll keep my remarks brief. But Amy, I completely agree with you about taking different approaches to reducing disparity. And my office has been working since last May with SPD, SDOT, and a lot of community stakeholder partners to do exactly that work in identifying traffic violations that should not be a basis for a stop. There was coverage a few weeks ago of the first batch of violations that we've identified, and SPD has agreed to remove as a basis for stopping somebody. And we've got ongoing work going on there. So I would be happy to provide you with information about that, and let you know what we're doing, and I'd love to get your input. But I agree, there are ways to reduce disparity in traffic stops. One of them is to just reduce the times when officers and people have to come into unnecessary contact with each other when it doesn't improve anybody's safety. So, and to your point about, kind of endlessly studying racism and bias and disparity, I also agree that studying it is great, but then what do we do about it? And so I think there also need to be alternative approaches to it, not just, trying to tease out little things and try to fix them, but let's explore alternative ways. And one of those is to stop trying to prove that there's bias or racism and acknowledge the harm. Let's educate people about the harm that's caused and then hold people accountable if they cause that harm, whether they intended to or not. So, now I'm going off a little bit on a tangent. And I just want to acknowledge Dr. Gale's comment about data being made available by SPD. I think there's a difference between availability and accessibility. And so we've been talking with the monitor about how we help community better use the data that SPD makes available and to make it understandable and include those, presumptions and things that SPD uses when they interpret their data, perhaps with a data dictionary or something, to make the data truly accessible so that anybody can go in there and have access to the information and draw their own conclusions. So I think that's all I want to say for now, but thanks, Felicia. And thanks everybody.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much. So I'm just gonna throw this out here. We have about 4 minutes, but as you know, we had a very rocky start. So if I don't want to be disrespectful of anybody's time, so feel free to log off if you like. But I think it's very important for those of us who can stay on another 5-10 minutes to hear the voices of those that have put their hands up, because we have people on this call that have not spoken up before, and very interesting stuff. And I'm sure that Dr. Oftelie has taken quite note of some of the sentiments here tonight. So please, just if you want to log off, feel free to do so. But for those of us that want to talk the rest of this out, let's go. I'm gonna go with you, Nick, because you've had your hand up. You've been very patient in waiting, and then I'll go with Joanna. I'm sorry. Wait, unmute yourself.
There we go.
There you go.
All right, thanks. What I'm just going to say here in terms of analytics, really pleased to hear you discussing analytics, because how you package the information makes it digestible to the norm, the people. And also, if you have a good sense of documentation of your analytics, then people can buy off on it.
I can barely hear you, Nick.
You don't hear me?
You're going in and out, so you need to stay closer to your mic.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to say the analytics concept, I think, is extremely valuable to help us digest the information that you guys work so hard to present. And a good example of how to package the information and also what you can look for is this book, San Francisco, by what's his name, Michael Schellenberger. It has 90 pages of footnotes, and they're all meticulously documented. Not a lot of charts and graphs, just facts. Very helpful. And then I guess the other question I would leave us with is, what are the rules about why you stop somebody? And then given you've got the rules, your officer is following the rules, what are the analytics to describe the results from stopping somebody? What was the age, the race? I understand it seems to be highly more leaning toward African-American, Black, but the fact is, what are the ages and the races, and how many times have weapons been found? And to begin with, why'd you stop them in the first place? What are the reasons that are justifiable for stopping? That's all. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah. So Nick, I just encourage you to read the assessment, because all those questions are answered in there. Like, what does a stop mean, and what makes it lawful? There's demographics in there, and outcomes, and the number of percentage of times, like someone who recovers a knife or a gun, for example. So also all that is in the assessment.
Very good. What's the title of the report?
I'm putting the report in the chat for you, Nick.
Thank you.
Okay, Joanna. Thank you, Nick.
I have to say, most people have been on this call have been involved in this process a lot more than I have been. But the harm, one of the harms that sometimes hasn't been addressed exactly is a harm it's the community, that to the community. One, at different times, it's been felt that, well, the police are very slow to come to any crisis in certain neighborhoods. but if it's a crisis in a well-off white neighborhood, they're there like that. And then the concern about if we do call in certain neighborhoods and there's a crisis, how that they can approach us not as a neighborhood to protect, but as though we're all their enemy or they're afraid of everybody. They're not there to protect us and deal with a crisis. And then that causes some communities not to call as quickly as they could and reduce some harmful, and reduce some very potentially harmful situations that might have been able to be prevented. And so it seems like it becomes this vicious circle. And it seems like somehow the police need to convince us that they care about our safety, that they're there to protect us, not to kill us.
Thank
And
you,
I'll mute.
Joanna. Okay, thank you. Teresa, and then I'll come into you, Dr. Gill. Teresa, you there?
Yes, thank you. I'm new at this and I'm learning a lot of good points have been brought up from all of you and Dr. Harriet. But and this is a simple question, but I just think it matters when you're talking about accountability, all the approaches and the techniques and the data. And so let's say it's still happening. And I'm asking about accountability. Is the union involved in this? Are they here? Are they listening to this? And are they willing to step up and hold people accountable? Because like someone said, you're going over it and over it and round, but then what's the solution if it's still happening? If a Black person still stopped for a small reason, or if they're shot, what's the result?
Ms. Reed's a great question. I don't know if anyone from either the two unions is on this call, but they are right an integral organizations in determining the future as far as collective bargaining and the conditions under which officers work. And so I completely agree, right, that they need to be part of this. And
because I was a union rep and two of them in. You can put all kind of policies and procedures in place, identify all the problems, but when it gets to that point and they have their contract and somebody gets held accountable, and then 3 years later they're brought back. So they have to be a part of it. And I don't know if it's a dumb question, but that's my input. And you gotta be careful. Somebody said something about changing the structure of where somebody goes on the police. You got on the roads, you got to be careful with that, because I'm finding when this Seattle safety street, a lot of the streets are rearranged and reorganized, and it's affecting minorities more. That's a whole nother topic. But as far as accountability, the union needs to be involved some kind of way and be willing to hold people accountable.
Yeah, that's a good point, Teresa. I'll do some research around seeing if we can get someone to one of the meetings in the future. Dr. Gale. What did it say? Cannot move video. Can Teresa and Nick? Yeah, okay, I think.
Oop.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Just to go back to what Teresa was saying, it's actually probably the most important point we could take away tonight, is that we can go through this data, we can figure out how to change policy, we can figure out how to change data collection, we can figure out how to change training, we can figure out all of that. But there's no industry, there is no profession in the world where you can have training, you can have policy that matters unless there's accountability, unless someone violates that training and policy and has to be held accountable. And we don't have that. So as it relates to the unions, Not a single city in the United States of America has made a significant advance in police accountability unless they went around the unions through a citizens initiative. It's true it's most certainly true in Nashville. It's become true in Portland, Oregon, in Oakland, in San Diego. The only exception to that is Ross Baraka in Newark, New Jersey in 2016, who took it upon himself to actually have true citizen oversight of police. So this was a very long way of saying the only way we're going to get actual accountability is through citizen oversight. The only way we're going to get citizen oversight is if we have an initiative. The police union will never allow that to happen. They have fought it in every city. Again, they don't fight it when there's an initiative, because the initiative makes very clear what the will of the people in that city is. Okay, I just want to quickly go through a couple of things because I'm sorry, Dr. Oftelie, you have to be called on the fact that last week in front of City Council, for the third time in 2 weeks, you lied about what the crisis intervention data does and does not include. You were asked repeatedly, are people who are killed included? And what you said, I have the direct quotes here, is that eventually, retroactively, they get included. That is simply not true. I was able to find 9 people killed in 6 years that were never in the data set. And I think there's a lot more that either were shot at or had type 3 use of force. So that's not true. Also not true is, you said you're looking and asking the citizenry for information. You just heard from Amy Sundberg that she tried to contact you. I can also, we don't have time tonight. I could tell 10 other people that I know have tried to contact you, and you have been solicitous and done nothing. So the most important example is someone who has spent decades in the homeless community documenting through a University of Washington study that police, I forget the figure, I think it's like 70, 80%, I may be underestimating, 70, 80% of homeless youth have been sexually abused by police in Seattle. That is a study that's been longstanding. This hasn't even been talked about within the CPC or within the monitor. Someone approached you over 3-4 months ago now with that data, and they've heard crickets.
Yeah,
okay,
that's just fundamentally not true. Dr. Gale, I do not tell everyone in public settings what we're investigating behind the scenes on that, right? That issue has been brought to our attention. It's been brought to the attention of the FBI and other accountability partners, and it's being reviewed.
Well, the person that actually has control of that data set might have something else to say, but I'll move on from there. I just want to point out on page 12.
I just want to say, Dr. Gill, you've done great tonight. You've done great, but no name calling, okay?
It's not name calling. This is fact. Last week at Public Safety, Dr. Oftelie lied, but let's move on from that.
Well, can you say again why you think I lied on that? Because I'd like a bit more clarity on what that.
Okay, I will give you your direct quote. The direct quote is what you said to Public Safety when asked not once, not twice, but 3 times by Councilmember Herbold and then Councilmember Nelson. What you said was, as far as anyone in crisis, this is a quote, that was a level of force that is documented. There is no one excluded from that. There are some rare instances where there was use of force, and initially, that was not classified as a crisis call. As worked through the system, you retroactively put that on a certain call. Then you were asked by Council Member Nelson, are you saying that initially it was not properly documented and that later it was properly documented? And you said that is correct. This is simply false. And again, I'm picking out 9 cases where people were murdered. I don't know how many, literally hundreds of other cases where type 3 use of force was used, where there could have been a near-death experience, and that's simply lost. Because again, in the crisis intervention data, it's a yes, no for the field use of force. We don't know what type of force was used.
No, that's documented for type 1, type 2, or type 3 use of force, right? If someone, a death would be in the category of a type 3 force, right? If there's a death that happens, we have teams that go out to do documentation around that, force review board, force investigation teams. The documentation of whether that person was in crisis or not can come after that, because the first thing you're doing as an officer and fit team is not saying, you're investigating a death, not whether or not there was a crisis. That comes as part of that, right? So if you overlay crisis into someone in crisis, and if there was a death, that is included in all the data, right? There's no exclusions there.
But it's not. It's got. I told you. I went through. It is possible. I will offer the possibility. I know that the data set that you're looking at is not the data set online, which again, you keep on saying the data is available. We're talking about different data sets. The data online has a yes, no for use of force. So I can't tell what the use of force is. Here's what I can tell is I can look at the exact date and time of the killing. And now when I say there were 9 killings, I'm not talking about the 32 since the consent decree.
Are you
I'm
saying
talking
9
about
killings for someone in crisis?
Exactly.
Okay.
Not injury,
So maybe
killed.
we can,
Yeah.
you know, we're over
Okay.
time, Dr. Gill, and you know, I don't mean to cut you off, but you know, this is for a greater conversation.
Yeah. So Felicia, what I would love though, Dr. Gill, is maybe I'm the first to admit that maybe I had that wrong, right? Maybe all the people that were doing the work around the data collection have something wrong. Can you please, instead of complaining, give me a concrete question to get into that, and I will work with all the teams to find the exact precise answer, right? What we need from this is not right. Is
I provided that data. Yeah, I provided the 9 documented cases. One of those cases, admittedly,
you have not provided me with 9 document cases. Can you email me at antonio.oftelie@seattlepolicemonitor.org with the 9 cases? I will go back and make sure to see if those were included. If you're thinking those were crisis cases of people killed, I will go back and work with all the parties to make sure that we look at that and make sure that
I'm sorry, Dr. Oftelie, you asked me a few weeks ago on Twitter to provide you the data.
Yes,
I gave you
right.
a link to my blog with the data. All those cases with the dates and the names, and that it was a crisis, are clearly documented on that data.
Your data on whether someone is in crisis or not does not agree necessarily with what the accountability partners believe if someone was in crisis, first of all. So if you can give me those 9 that you think were in crisis and were killed, I will work with the parties to make sure that those were documented in the appropriate way, right? Again, I look at systemically, but I'll make sure in this case to say, let's look at those individual incidents to make sure that those were accounted for. And I will work with everyone to get the correct answer.
Again, I'm having trouble understanding. I gave you a list of all 32 people killed since John T. Williams, and on that list in bold, it says crisis. So I'm a little confused here. You had the information, but that's it. That's it.
Okay.
So Felicia, maybe you can facilitate that, Felicia, and can give me the 9 exact names. I will go back and work with OPA, SPD, and OIG to make sure that that's included in that data set and that those are appropriately documented as type 3 use of force that ended in death. And if we need to look at all those individual cases to better understand them, that's something that we can all collectively do.
I'll send them to you tonight. Thank you all. Thank you everybody for staying on the call from the beginning to the end. It was quite challenging. Red, I'm so happy to see you. But Agnes, all of you, everybody, with no more to be said for tonight, we still got a lot of work to do. So I appreciate any feedback you have. Go to the website. What's the website? The SeattlePoliceMonitor.org, and fill out the questionnaire. And the 2 other things I just want to say.
Because Valerie, to your point in the chat, right? Saying someone lied is assuming that I intentionally misled people based on what I said, right? I did not lie about anything in that presentation. In fact, I'm doubling down to say if there was something that I missed, I will go look for that, right? It'll be priority number 1. So that's why I asked Felicia to gather the 9 names, and we will cross-reference that to make sure that we know exactly what happened with that, right? I do not lie about what I know and about data. Never have, never will.
That's great.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay.
I was responding to the person in the chat who wanted you to be cut off. And I just want to say that we do have to have these very robust conversations in order to really get anywhere with Okay, because as I always say in these meetings.
Okay, Valerie, I'm sorry I'm really sorry because it's
differential here.
Huh?
That's all.
I appreciate that, Valerie. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah, there are some
So
people who like to say things.
two things I like to ask is that if you want to be on my email list, if you would please put either email me or put your email address in the chat, because I'm just like putting the notices out here, not knowing where they're falling. So if you want to be a little bit more engaged, and then also please, please, please share the information with your contacts and to get people to these meetings, because it's very apparent that the community wants to be and needs to be heard. So with all that being said, good night, everybody. Good night.
Everyone for your time.